出発の信号を確認しました。レンズタイムラプス。
Mission accomplished.
任務完了しました。信用乗車も基地までお送りします。 出発の信号を確認しました。レンズがあなたのためさよなら。巡航プログラムを起動しました。
Mission accomplished.
任務完了しました。親友お嬢様を基地までお送りします。出発の信号を確認しました。巡航プログラムを起動しました。レンズ露出。レンズがあなたにムラップス。 しました。親友お嬢様を基地までお送りします。サブデータを取得しました。出発の信号を確認しました。巡航プログラムを起動しました。レンズドラレンズがアサインブラックス。
Mission accomplished.
任務完了しました。親友お嬢様を基地までお送りします。出発の信号を確認しました。 しました。親友お嬢様を基地までお送りします。出発の信号を確認しました。撮影開始します。撮影連続連続突出
Mission accomplished.
こんにちは。こんにちは、ドクター。今の私はロドスのオペレーターに過ぎない。あなたの指揮に従う。
任務完了しました。親友お嬢様を基地までお送りします。 のために侵略しますって教えて。
友人たちが祝福をささやいている。私たちの勝利だ、ドクター。 人たちが祝福をささやいている。私たちの勝利だ、ドクター。
レンズ設営。
Mission accomplished.
Is unidentified.
お
Is
嬢
dead.
様を基地までお送りします。
There's a popular myth that I've heard about several bridges, including the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco and the Forth Bridge in eastern Scotland, that they paint the structure continuously from end to end. Once they finish at one end, they just start back up on the other. It's not exactly true, at least for any structures I'm familiar with, but if you drive over any steel bridges regularly, it might seem like the painting never quite ends. That's because despite its ease of fabrication, relatively low cost, and incredible strength, steel has a limitation that we're all familiar with: rust. Steel corrodes when exposed to the elements, especially when the elements include salty sea air. I'm doing a deep dive series into corrosion engineering. We've talked about the tremendous cost of rust and how different materials exhibit corrosion. We talked about protecting against rust using dissimilar metals like zinc and aluminum. And now I want to show you the other major weapon in the fight against rust. If you've ever thought, this channel is so good he could make it interesting to watch paint dry, well, let's test it out. I have the Rust-O-Matic 3000 set up for another corrosion protection shootout, plus a bunch of other cool demos as well. I'm Grady, and this is Practical Engineering. On today's episode, we're talking about high-performance coating systems for corrosion protection.
This video is sponsored by HelloFresh. More on them later.
You might have noticed a word missing from that episode headline: paint. Of course, paint and coatings get used interchangeably, even within the industry, but there is a general distinction between the two. The former has the sole purpose of decoration. For example, nearly everyone has painted the walls of a bedroom to improve the way it looks. Coatings, on the other hand, are used for protection. They look like paint on the surface, but their real purpose is to provide a physical barrier between the metal and the environment, reducing the chance that it will come into contact with oxygen and moisture to lead to corrosion. Combined with cathodic protection that I covered in a previous video, a coating system properly applied and well maintained can extend the lifespan of a steel structure pretty much indefinitely. Although paint and coatings often include similar ingredients, are applied in the same way, and usually look the same in the end, there are some huge differences as well. The biggest one being the consequences if things go wrong. There are definitely right ways and wrong ways to paint a bedroom, but generally, the risk of messing it up is pretty small. Sometimes the color's not quite right or the coverage isn't perfect, but those are pretty easy to fix. In the worst scenario, it's only a few $100s and a couple days' work to completely redo it. Not true with a coating system on a major steel structure. Corrosion is the biggest threat to many types of infrastructure, and if the protection system fails, the structure can fail too. It's not just money on the line either. It's also pipelines can leak or break, and bridges collapse. Finally, it's often no simple matter to simply reapply a coating system, because many structures are difficult to access and disruptive to shut down. Applying protective coatings is something you only want to do every so often, ideally every 25 to 50 years for most types of infrastructure. That's why the materials and methods used to apply them are so far beyond what we normally associate with painting, and why the systems are often called high-performance coatings. Let me show you what I mean. These are the standard US federal government specifications used in Department of Defense projects. We're in Division 9, which is finishes, and if I scroll down, you can see we have a totally different document for paints and general coatings than the one used for high performance coatings. There's even a more detailed spec used for critical steel structures. If you take a peek into the specification, you'll see that a significant portion of the work isn't the coating application itself, but the preparation of the steel surface beforehand. It's estimated that surface prep makes up around 70% of the cost of a coating system, and that 80% of coating failures can be attributed to inadequate surface preparation. That's why most coating projects on major steel structures start with abrasive blasting. The process of shooting abrasive media through a hose at high pressure, often known as sandblasting, is usually the quickest and most cost-efficient way to clean steel of surface rust, old coatings, dirt, and contaminants. And cleanliness is essential for good adhesion of the coating. But abrasive blasting does more than just clean, it roughens. Most high-performance coatings work best on steel that isn't perfectly smooth. The roughness, also known as the surface profile, gives the coating additional surface area for stronger adhesion. In fact, let's just take a look at a random product data sheet for a high-performance primer, and you can see right there that the manufacturer recommends blast cleaning with a profile of 1.5 mils. That means the difference between the major peaks and valleys along the surface should be around 1.5 thousandths of an inch, or about 40 microns. It also means we need a way to measure that tiny distance in the field, in other words, without the help of scanning electron microscopy, to make sure that the steel is in the right condition for the best performance of the coating, and there are a few ways to do that. One method uses a stylus with a sharp point that is drawn across the surface of the steel. The trace can be stored by a computer, and the profile is the distance between the highest peak and the lowest valley. Another option is just to use a depth micrometer with a sharp point that will project into the valleys to get a measure of the profile. Finally, you can use replica tape that has a layer of compressible foam. I have an example of several grit-blasted surfaces here, and I can apply a strip of the replica tape. When I burnish the tape against the steel surface, the foam compresses to form an impression of the peaks and valleys. Here's what that looks like in a cross-section view. When the tape is removed, we can measure its new thickness, subtract the thickness of the plastic liner, and get a measure of the surface profile. Here's a look at how the foam looks after burnishing on a relatively smooth surface and a very rough one. I used my depth micrometer to measure a profile of about 1 mil or 25 microns for the smooth surface, and about 2.5 mil or 63 microns on the rough one. Just to demonstrate the importance of surface preparation, I'm going to do a little coating of my own here in my garage. I've got 4 samples of steel here. 2 I've roughened up using a flap disc on a grinder in lieu of sandblasting, and 2 I've sanded to a fairly smooth surface. They aren't mirror surfaces, but the surface profile is much lower than that of the roughened samples. I also have some oil, and I'll spread a thin coat on one of the rough samples and one of the smooth ones. I wiped the oil off with a paper towel, but no soap. So now we have all the phases of youth here. Smooth and clean, rough and oily, and smooth and oily. I'll coat one side of all 4 samples using this epoxy product, leaving the other sides exposed. Notice how the wet paint doesn't even want to stick to the dirty surfaces, but eventually does lay down. I put 2 coats on each sample, and now it's into the Rustomatic 3000, the silliest machine I've ever built. I go into more detail on this in the cathodic protection video if you want to learn more, but essentially it's going to dip these samples in salt water, let them dry, take a photo, and do it all over again roughly every 5 minutes to stress test these steel samples. We'll leave it running for a few weeks and come back to see how the samples hold up against corrosion. There are countless types of coating systems in use around the world to protect steel against corrosion. The chemistry and availability of new and more effective coatings continue to evolve, but there is somewhat of an industry standard system used in infrastructure projects that consists of 3 coats. The first coat, called the primer, is used to adhere strongly to the steel and provide the first layer of protection. Sometimes the primer coat includes particles of zinc metal, just like using a zinc anode to provide cathodic protection. A zinc-rich undercoat can sacrifice itself to protect steel from corrosion if any moisture gets through. Next, the mid-coat provides the primary barrier to moisture and air. Epoxy is a popular choice because it adheres well and lasts a long time. Epoxy often comes in two parts that have to mix together, like the product I used on those steel samples. But epoxy has a major weakness: UV rays. So most coating systems use a top coat of polyurethane, whose main purpose is to protect the epoxy mid-coat from being damaged by the rays of the sun. It's often clear to visible light, but ultraviolet light is blocked so it can't damage the lower coats. The coating manufacturer provides detailed instructions on how to apply each coating and under what environmental conditions it can be done. They've tested their products diligently, and they don't want to pay out warranties if something goes wrong, so coating manufacturers go to a lot of trouble to make sure contractors use each product correctly. They often have to wait for clear or cool days before coating to make sure each layer meets the specifications for humidity and temperature. Even the applied thickness of the product can affect a coating's performance. A coating that is too thin may not provide enough of a barrier, and one that's too thick may shrink and crack. Manufacturers often give a minimum and maximum thickness of the coating both before and after it dries. Wet film thickness can be measured using one of these little gauges. I just press it into the wet paint and I can see the highest thickness measurement that picked up some of the coating. Dry film thickness can also be measured in the field for quality control using a magnetic probe. Of course, once the coating is applied and dry, it has to be inspected for coverage. Coatings are particularly vulnerable to damage since they're so thin, and defects, called holidays, can be hard to spot by eye. Holiday detector devices are used by coating inspectors to make sure there are no uncovered areas of steel. Most of them work just like the game of Operation, but with higher voltage and fancier probes. If any part of the probe touches bare metal, an alarm will sound, notifying the inspector of even the tiniest pinhole or air bubble in the coating so it can be repaired. Once the system passes the quality control check, the structure can be put into service with the confidence that it will be protected from corrosion for the next several decades to come. Let's check in on the Rust-O-Matic 3000 and see how the samples go. Surprisingly, you can't see much difference in the time-lapse view. I let these samples run for about 3 weeks, and the uncoated steel underwent much more corrosion than the coated area of each square. I also have dried salt deposits all over my shop now, but the real difference was visible once the samples were cleaned up. I used a pressure washer to blast off some of the rust, and this was enough to remove the epoxy coating on all the samples except the rough and clean one. That sample took a little more effort to remove the coating. At first glance, the coating appears to have protected all the samples against this corrosion stress test, but if you look around the edges, the difference becomes obvious. The rough and clean sample had the least intrusion of rust getting under the edges of the coating, and you can see that nearly the entire coated area is just as it was before the test. The smooth and clean sample had much more rust under the edges of the coating than you can see in these semicircular areas protruding into the coated area. Similarly, the roughened yet oily sample had those semicircular intrusions of rust all around the perimeter of the coated area. The smooth and dirty sample was, as expected, the worst of them all. Lots of corrosion got under the coating on all sides, including a huge area along nearly the entire bottom of the coated area. It's not a laboratory test, but it is a conspicuous example of the importance of surface preparation when applying a coating for corrosion protection. Like those samples, I'm just scratching the surface of high-performance coating systems in this video. Even within the field of corrosion engineering, coatings are a major discipline with a large body of knowledge and expertise spread across engineers, chemists, inspectors, and coatings contractors, all to extend the lifespan and safety of our infrastructure.
We're back with another attempt of me cooking dinner while my wife tries to capture that on camera, but this time we have the whole family, including Wesley the editor. We've got two little helpers who, let's be honest, aren't that helpful when it comes to actually cooking dinner, but they sure do make the process a lot more fun, especially when Uncle Wesley's in town. HelloFresh is basically a cheat code to a fun and memorable night in, and you get a delicious meal at the end as a bonus. It's always fun to get seasonal recipes and produce straight to our front door. We've been using it for years now and honestly have never had a meal that we didn't enjoy.
How many boys does it take to match the
And now that we have picky eaters in the house, HelloFresh's kid-friendly recipes make it super easy for us to get dinner on the table quickly that Big Brother is sure to eat. No. HelloFresh has a bunch of different choices to help you reach your dietary goals or just try something new, including vegetarian, pescatarian, and fit and wholesome. Give it a try at HelloFresh.com and use code PRACTICAL65 for 65% off plus free shipping. Supporting our sponsors helps support the channel.
They look so cute.
That's HelloFresh.com and use code PRACTICAL65. Thank you for watching, and let me know what you think.
Mission accomplished.
任務完了しました。親友お嬢様を基地までお送りします。出発の信号を確認しました。レンズがあなたのために尽力します。レッツプレイ。 了しました。親友お嬢様を基地までお送りします。出発の信号を確認しました。レンズがあなたのために尽力。レンズパノラマ。はーい、巡航プログラムを起動しました。はーい、露出。
Mission accomplished.
任務完了しました。親友お嬢様を基地までお送りします。
So this is what a million Iron Ages
出
per
発の信
hour
号を
looks
確
like.
認しま
But
した。
before we get there, let's start at the beginning. Iron farms are one of the most basic and essential farms in Minecraft. Almost everyone has made one, but have you ever wondered why there are so many different variations of iron farms, and how much the design differences actually make a difference? This was a series of questions I kept asking myself, so I decided to find out. I also wanted to push iron farms as far as possible and see if a 100% efficient farm was possible and how hard it would be to build. The results may surprise you, as they did for me. In the end, this journey gave me a perspective and an understanding I did not have before making it, and I was hoping to share that with you. So my goal is that after this video, you will have a detailed insight into all aspects of designing an iron farm, understand the real game impact of design decisions, and can design your own high-efficiency iron farms that fit any situation. And Finally, we will have a bit of fun and push iron farming to the maximum. I would like to note here that I'm well aware that there are many more talented people than myself that have videos covering iron farm design. Even so, after researching this topic extensively, I still have more questions. And as a result, this video is aimed at an audience like, well, myself. My ambition is to answer all the questions and cover all the perspectives that I, myself, was wondering about, even after watching and reading the existing material. Okay, so with all of that out of the way, where do we start? Well, with the basics. So there are some rules behind all iron farms. There are two ways to spawn a golem, with villagers gossiping or villagers panicking. Gossiping is really only useful for peaceful mode, so we will skip that one completely as it's much slower than panic farms. With panic farms, you need 3 villagers. They need to have slept within the last 20 minutes and be panicking, i.e. scared by a zombie or other valid mob. Finally, they must not have detected an iron golem's presence or summoning within the last 600 game ticks or 30 seconds. After these conditions have been met, a villager can attempt to summon an iron golem, which then must have a valid spawn point to spawn. It's pretty straightforward, but there are some more details that we will get deeper into further along in the video. Even so, with these rules, we can calculate our maximum theoretical iron farm rate. A maximum of 1 iron golem can spawn every 30 seconds. There are 3,600 seconds in an hour. Divided by 30, that gives us 120 golems per hour. Golems drop 4 iron on average, so the theoretical maximum is 480 iron ingots per hour on average per villager cluster. To achieve this maximum rate, a couple of conditions must occur. Firstly, exactly 600 game ticks or 30 seconds after a villager has spawned a golem, the next golem must spawn. Secondly, immediately after the golem has spawned, it will poof, disappear. And finally, the villagers will be able to sleep, but they will sleep without disrupting the spawning cycle of 1 golem every 30 seconds. If all of these conditions are met, the maximum will theoretically be reached. But the big question now is how to achieve, or at least get as close as possible to all of these conditions. Alright, so I think perhaps the best way to talk about maximizing efficiency is to start with a, well, pretty inefficient farm, i.e. this one. It's a very simple farm, but not very efficient. At 317 ingots per hour, it's about 66% of the maximum. So let's improve it. But before we get started, I just want to note that there's nothing wrong with this farm or using this farm. We are trying to maximize efficiency in this video to learn about farm dynamic, not to tell anyone how to play the game. In almost all cases, a less than the most efficient farm is the best solution. Play as you would like and let others do the same. So, with that said, let's jump right into it. To increase this farm's efficiency, let's start off with the biggest bang for the buck, improving the time to kill. With this farm, we have quite a long time to kill. First the golem spawns, then it must be transported over to the lava, then it takes a full 12.5 seconds to kill the golem. The reason why this matters is because of the 4th spawn condition. The villager must not have detected an iron golem's presence or summoning within the last 30 seconds or 600 game ticks to summon a golem. Detecting a summoning is straightforward. When the golem is summoned by one of the villagers in the group, a cooldown countdown of 600 ticks starts for the entire group. But when talking about detecting the golem's presence, it's a little bit more complicated. Each villager scans a 33 by 32 by 33 area of blocks centered on his feet at a random time every 200 game ticks or 10 seconds. If during the scan a golem is detected, then the 600 tick cooldown timer is reset. This is demonstrated clearly with this farm here. Using Netlong's carpet mod, we see the golem cooldown timer here. You see that all the villagers have different cooldown times? That's because of the iron golem detection. If it was due to summoning alone, the cooldowns would all be the same because they would be detecting the same summoning. But here they are different because they detect the golem after the summoning at random times for each individual villager. Alright, so let's dig into this with just a little bit of math. Using some geometry and basic assumptions, we can can calculate that the iron golem will on average spawn roughly 2 blocks from the lava. Water pushes mobs at 1.4 meters per second, so we can round to roughly 1.5 seconds for the water to push the golem to the lava, and then an additional 12.5 seconds for the lava to kill the golem. That's roughly a 14-second kill time on average. What this results in is a high probability of resetting the golem spawn cooldown timer, but the real question is, by how much? Well, here is where another detail is important. The spawn attempt timer. We see here that there is a 100-tick countdown. This is a timer for spawn attempt. When it hits 0, the villager will attempt a summoning if all other conditions pass. What this means for our discussion is that the time between spawns will only increase in 100-tick or 5-second steps. Even if the golem detection only increases the cooldown timer, say like 2 seconds, the actual impact will be 5 seconds because of the spawn attempt timer. So what does this mean? Well, to simplify it, let's visualize it as a timeline. We can make it even easier by splitting this up into 5-second intervals to signify the spawn attempts. Any cooldown reset within these ranges will be rounded up to the next 5-second step. So remember, the villagers scan every 10 seconds, but at random times, which is assigned when the villagers are loaded. So for example, if the time happens to be at 8 seconds, then it will scan at 8 seconds and at 18. In this example, the villager will increase the cooldown time by 8 seconds and increase the time between spawns by 10 seconds due to the 5-second step. Now let's look at if the villager scan happens to align with 3 seconds. Then it will scan at 3 seconds and at 13 seconds. So in this case, the time between spawns will increase by 15 seconds because of that second scan at 13 seconds. So for our example, here are the zones that will increase our time between spawns by different amounts. The first 4 seconds increases the time between spawns by 15 seconds because of that second scan. The next 1 second increases the time by 5 seconds, and scans between 5 and 10 seconds increases the time by 10 seconds. So now we can calculate the expected impact on efficiency using probabilities. Remember, we must consider that there are 3 independent villagers. So the probability that at least one of the 3 villagers scans 4 seconds or before is about 78%. The probability that all 3 villagers scan between 4 and 5 seconds is about 0.1%, or in this case, we're just going to round right to 0. The remainder of possibilities is then about 22% of the time. So 78% of the time, the timer will increase by 15 seconds. 22% of the time, the timer will increase by 10 seconds. We can then add these together to get the average time between spawns of about 14 seconds. This equates to approximately a 32% efficiency reduction, or from this factor alone, a farm efficiency of about 68%. That's not very good, but it is pretty close to our real game measured efficiency of 66%. The difference between our calculated efficiency of 68 and the in-game measured efficiency of 66 is due to other inefficiencies. What this clearly shows us is that the time to kill has a huge impact on overall farm efficiency. Hey, I just want to take a second to mention here, this video took quite a lot of effort, and as a small creator, any support you show is hugely motivating for me personally and highly appreciated. So if you want to support this video, please like and comment. If you want to support the channel, subscribe. And if you are interested in joining what I hope is a burgeoning community, check out the Discord. It right now literally has 5 people in it, so get in at the ground floor while you can. That said, thank you for the attention, now back to the video. But if we continue on this topic, then the question is, how do we reduce the time to kill? Well, kill is not really the right word. It's time to disappearance. See, we have that 33 by 32 by 33 box, and as long as we remove the golem from that box, then it won't be detected. So, what is a good way to disappear the golem quickly? Well, gravity. For
明
one,
かりはも
if
う
the
少
golem
し
spawns on a
明るい
platform
方がいい
one
です
block
か？
above the villager's head, then it's a 19 block drop to the bottom of the detection range. And since golems are 2.7 blocks high, it's a 21.7 block drop out of the detection range. In Minecraft, that takes 1.3 seconds. Not too shabby. Unfortunately, we cannot just drop the golems directly. We need to spawn them on a platform and drop them off. Water is the most common way to do this. The downside is that water is quite slow compared to gravity, so the majority of the time to kill is actually with the water. If we have a one-directional platform 8 blocks long, then the approximate average distance to drop would be about 4.7 blocks. 4.7 divided by 1.4, it takes about 3.4 seconds to push the golem, plus drop time, 4.7 seconds. This equates to approximately an 85% chance of increasing the time between golems 5 seconds, resulting in a 12.4% efficiency reduction. That's not too bad, but the whole question behind this video is, can we do better? Well, there are two small improvements. First is to move the spawn platform to below the villagers. This results in about a 2% efficiency increase, so not a huge amount, but it is, well, something. The other improvement we can make is to reduce the water push distance by shortening our spawn platform. Here's a graph showing the efficiency reduction for different spawn platform lengths. You can see that the less distance the water has to push, the higher the efficiency of the farm. Makes sense, right? Well, it's wrong. Or well, not 100% wrong, but we're missing something important. When we decrease the length of the spawn platform, we then decrease the chances that an iron golem spawns at all. When a spawn attempt happens, the game selects a random column within the spawnable area to see if it's suitable to spawn. If so, it spawns a golem. If not, it tries again for a total of 10 attempts. So if we reduce the spawn platform size, then we increase the risk that all 10 attempts will fail, which has a significant impact on overall efficiency. Using this equation, we can plot the chance of spawn failures versus the number of blocks in the platform. We use power of 30 rather than a power of 3 because all 3 villagers have 10 attempts. When we plot this as a graph, we see that at about 60 blocks, the chance of spawn failures is negligible, but below that, the impact can be quite significant. To demonstrate, let's try to modify our example farm. Its spawn platform is 5 blocks wide. If we make a water push distance 2 blocks long, then there are 10 potential spawnable blocks. And from the graph, that's about a 70% spawn success rate. This will decrease the farm's efficiency about 19% when considering spawn success probability and time to kill together. A reduction of 19% isn't too bad, but it is worse than our 8 block long farm, which had a reduction of 13.6% when also factoring in spawn success. So obviously we need to consider the amount of spawnable blocks, or it can have a significant impact. The easiest way to increase the amount of spawnable blocks without increasing time to kill is to increase the width of the platform. The spawnable area is 16 by 16, so we can use up to a 16 block wide spawning platform. If we then add the impact of spawn success rate for different width platforms to our water push length graph, it looks something like this. So as long as the spawn platform has enough spawning spaces, i.e. is wide enough, the impact of spawn failures is not very noticeable. For example, our highest efficiency water push farm is a 16 wide, 2 long spawning platform below the villagers. This will work with a very good efficiency of 91.3%. Even so, I, for one, cannot love this farm design. Simply because, well, I'm paid. And it's kind of ugly. There is another problem though. When scaling up the farm, the golem detection areas between the villager pockets will overlap, meaning that the probability of reducing the golem spawn rates increases substantially. We can fix this out by spacing the farms out further, but then they become more difficult to build, and the collection system is going to be a little bit of a mess, and in the end, it's just simply not very elegant. So is there another option? Well, yes, but with a caveat. Nether portals. When discussing time to kill, there is no faster way than nether portals. There are a couple of factors that make this work. First, iron golems have a 1.4 by 1.4 wide hitbox. Second, they spawn in the middle of the block. And third, they do not do block collision checks when they are looking for a spawnable location. All three of these together means that if a golem spawns on a block next to a portal, their hitbox will overlap with the portal and they will be instantly teleported to the nether. This allows us to achieve the time to kill condition for a max rate farm, well, pretty easily. We can space the portals 2 blocks apart and they will still work 100% of the time. As long as we maintain enough spawnable blocks, the spawn chance will be near 100% and our time to kill is next to 0. But I mentioned a caveat, and there is one, a big one. A setup like this has the potential to cause a bit of lag, particularly on servers. That said, the setup on a single player world with a decently modern computer like mine will be okay. So for the sake of good video structure, we will come back to the topic of lag later. First, I want to finish our discussion about designing a max rate farm. Here we have a very nice single unit farm. Time to kill is approximately 0, and we have plenty of spawning spaces, giving us a spawn success rate of 99.9999 and 10 more 9s % success rate. On the nether side, we have a lava blade and some hoppers. So we should be set up for a max rate farm, right? Well, here is where most reasonable people will stop. With this farm, we will hit a 98 to 99% efficiency most of the time. So good enough. That, though, is not the point of this video. For this last 2% or so of efficiency optimizations, we need to look really deeply into our rules and see what's happening. In particular, these 2 rules. The first one we've covered extensively with time to kill, but the second one we haven't really even mentioned. The villagers must be able to sleep, but that must not disrupt the spawning cycle, meaning that the villagers need to sleep every 24,000 ticks or this while the golem cooldown timer is activated, not during spawn attempts. So now we are discussing our scare method. Here we have a very simple setup, a bouncing zombie. This is quite nice because there's no redstone. The whole idea is that the zombie most of the time has a line of sight with the villagers, i.e. is scaring them, but for a small amount of time the zombie breaks line of sight so the villagers can sleep. It's easy to see how this will cause inefficiencies. There's a small probability that the zombie will break line of sight at the same time as the spawn attempt. When this happens, it will skip that attempt and increase the time between golem spawns 5 seconds for that particular attempt. Again, we're talking pennies here. This is not a huge impact, but it is something. So can we do anything better? Well, yes. The obvious solution is using a redstone clock. Alright, let's pause here for a second. Here is where I need to note something. This video is made in 1.18.2, even though when it's being made, up through 1.19.2 has been released. The reason why is because of a bug that I found while making this video that increases the minimum time between spawns in the 1.19 versions. I made a video that explains this bug in detail, so check that out if you're curious. This change has no impact on the general concepts discussed earlier or further on, but would make the calculations and calculated efficiencies different. The reason I decided to use 1.18.2 here is because I believe that Mojang will patch this bug, so newer versions will likely match the timing discussed in this video. I may be wrong though, so make sure to verify the timing for whatever version you are working with. With that said, let's continue. The most common type of redstone clock is an etho hopper clock. This in theory will be better than the bouncing zombie chamber of death, but there is still a problem. This is such an incredibly tiny detail that's almost unnoticeable, but I feel like I need to explain it regardless, and honestly, the